Welcome to ISSQUARED Seminar Web Series. After watching this video, let us know if it helped you or if you have any other questions or comments. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new videos just like this. Thanks so much for watching.
Very good evening, everyone. Very good morning, everyone. Welcome for this webinar. We appreciate your time which you have taken out to listen to us. In fact, to present this webinar, Mr. Bala, who is a CEO, who is the founder of ISSQUARED since 2010, who's been in this industry for more than 25 years, and one of the seasoned expertise on identity and access management. So he'll be one of the speakers. Along with him, Amit Singh, who is a security and infrastructure architect with more than 20 years of experience and who has delivered multiple projects on security and infrastructure. He's also will be there to give you the intelligence on PIM and PAM. So I would request Bala and Amit to take on the stage and take it forward.
Hey, thank you. I'm hoping that everybody is doing good, everybody's staying healthy, and for most of us, we are still staying home, staying safe, and hence you can actually see the background, the ceiling fan in my house. So I'm actually at home and doing this presentation, as most of us here in the US. And so just to give a little bit of a background, the identity and access management vertical is a pretty broad and deep vertical. We will definitely not be able to do justice to this vertical in the 45 minutes or so that we are going to be having discussions, but this is just the one of the first webinars in the series of webinars that we will be doing. We will be doing one on identity management separately, one on Red Forest. So look out for the invites as the topics interest you. And we will continue to do it. And any feedback on the webinar, the contents is welcome so that we can improve and be more useful to our friends everywhere. On this webinar, we have people joining us from the Middle East, Africa, and US region. And wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And I think most of us have started, so I would like to introduce myself. As Mridul said, I have about 25 plus years of experience in the security infrastructure, identity and access management, programming. I have been in the trenches, done the cabling, done the systems administration, networks, configured the firewall. So I have been fortunate to have been given the privilege to work on many different systems in my career. And so I would like to share that experience today as much as possible. And I would like to allow Amit to introduce himself, and then we will get started with the webinar. Amit?
Yeah, thanks, Bala. Hello, everyone. Good day to you all. I'm Amit Singh, as you all know by now. And thank you, Mridul, for adding like 5 years to my experience. Do I look that old? Probably not. All right. So basically, I have 15 years of experience in IT infrastructure, identity management, security. Have been with ISSQUARED under Bala for the past 5+ years. And the kind of work that I got to got experience on working for this company has been pretty vast in the field of security and identity management, especially. So I'm really excited to be here in this webinar and share some insights into PIM and PAM, privileged identity management and access management that I've been working on for the past 7+ years. And I hope that you would find this useful. Thank you.
Okay. We would like to go through the webinar slides. We definitely don't intend to bore you guys with the slideware. I'm hoping that this is going to be interesting. And if there are, we definitely welcome questions. In this webinar, we would like to keep the questions towards the end, and we will give ample time for the questions to be answered. Amit, if we can share the slides.
Are you not seeing the slides right now? Because I'm sharing.
Can everyone see the slides?
Yes, Bala, we are able to see the screen, slides now.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
It's visible here.
Can you see it, Bala?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
So today's topic is going to be very specifically centered around PIM and PAM, which is Privileged Identity Management and Access Management. Why it is important in today's day and age. What are the scenarios? What are the challenges that are faced by business, especially in a scenario where a lot of the workforce is now working from home? It presents a new type of challenge for the information security team to secure the environment, because now the perimeter has expanded to everybody's home. So that's an important change the way we live today, and probably this is going to be something that we are going to be living going forward, as I like to work from home. So probably I want to keep going with that. And then the maturity model is something that is generally industry standard on where you are on your journey to secure and be compliant to a number of regulations, as the regulation landscape changes on a daily basis, as there are countries, states within those countries coming up with new regulations to secure, to be more compliant, and this landscape is going to change with the threat landscape changing around it. So we are going to be delving into each of these topics today. And if there is any feedback on any specific topic that you want to have more information on, please give that as a feedback or send us an email, and we will make sure that we will put another session around those topics. Amit, if you can go to the next slide. Okay. Just before we get into the PIM and PAM, I'll just would like to take a couple of minutes to give you a background about ISSQUARED, which we have not done. We are an infrastructure security company. We provide consulting managed services around any of the core components of the infrastructure: identity, access management, security, perimeter security, segmentation, managed SOC, NOC type of services. And we also have our own products, which we basically have built over the last 7 years, which have been deployed in multiple enterprise organizations. And these products are around security and infrastructure. Having said that, as I said in the beginning, the identity and access governance space, as the Gartner or Forrester calls it now, has transformed the landscape of security over the last, I would say, 2 decades. In the early 2000s, the identity and access governance was called as identity management, and pretty much most of it was around building a directory, a common directory, like an Active Directory or an LDAP, which would allow the applications to authenticate, write scripts, or there were very few engines that were available, I would say, like the Microsoft Host Management Server or the Meta Directory services, which would allow you to provision and deprovision accounts and a few attributes. And most of it was done by custom scripting for moving the data from HR or other source feeds into the target systems. That landscape has changed with many vendors coming in on the provisioning space. And as the industry moved towards granular access management, access control, there were fine-grained access, coarse-grained access, RBAC, ABAC. A lot of acronyms have been thrown into the soup of identity and access management. So at the end of the day, if you actually think about it, anything that you want to secure is basically an asset to the organization. You secure that asset by identifying who has access to the asset, and this could be a warm body person, it could be a computer system, it could be a service, something that you can actually identify, which is what you basically call as an identity. And then the third piece of it is what access does that identity have over that particular resource. So if you consider this as a Venn diagram, the perfect part of it where the three interact is what you want to secure the most, because that's where most of the attack vectors would basically originate. So from each of these pillars, there are multiple ways of managing the assets, multiple ways of managing identity, multiple ways of managing privilege. The holy grail for the management is something that can manage all three of them perfectly, which we are still trying to figure out how that's going to be done. So there's no one single solution in the market which will address the need for being able to secure and manage all three of them all at the same time. So this basically causes a lot of compliance headache for especially folks in the regulated industry, whether it be finance or banking sector. You take drug manufacturing and other types of manufacturing where you are basically injecting things into people's body. It's a lot more regulated than say an industry which is a little bit less regulated in terms of, say, education. If you take college, schools, they're a little less regulated compared to those industries. So each of these industries have their own challenges, but specifically the regulated, highly regulated industries, financial and manufacturing, are the ones that they actually have to put a lot of tools to make things happen. Amit, if you can go to the next slide. So if going a little bit more deeper into the identity and access management space, as I said, this is a much deeper and vast topic to cover. But overall, if you actually want to slice it and dice it into what are the various components that are critical for a good identity and access management solution, is first, you need to know where the identities are coming from, what you have within the system. So you need to be able to provision, deprovision, and manage the life cycle of the identity. And generally, you basically have one or two or three sources of data coming in from different systems, whether it is HR, whether it is an external vendor database that you want to actually bring in. There are a bunch of attributes which will come along with the identity, which you can actually leverage to configure the access part for the applications and the resources that are to be protected within your landscape. Once you basically bring in all the identities, you have to do the credentialing of these, which is generally mapping these identities to accounts in each of the targets, whether it be databases, applications, devices with network or others. Password management, which is a separate topic in itself, needs to be handled by a solution so that there is some semblance of control over your environment, even though password is not the most secure way of protecting your environment. There are other ways like multi-factor authentication that is more useful, but still you need to be able to manage that that environment. Once you have brought in all the identities and accounts have been created, you start providing access to your resources, which is where your access management comes in. And the ideal scenario would be you want to basically provide access based on a risk that is associated with an identity or the implementation of that particular identity against a target. So I could be a person who is working in the accounts team. So I might need to have access into the accounting application, but I might not need access to the Active Directory in the IT department. So based on what my role is, what type of access I should have, and based on the risk of the system itself, even within the account system, I might be just entering, say, the accounts receivable data and might be generating invoices. I might not be generating PO. So the risk defines what an identity should have access to. And the solution should be able to handle most of it as a business process rather than an IT headache. Once you have been assigned an access and an identity has been created, you need to be compliant to whether that identity and access is required over a period of time. So I could move from accounts receivable into accounts payable department, or I could change my role from being an accounts person to a salesperson. So do I need to have access to the accounts application once I have moved into the sales application? How does it get turned on, turned off? Can those be automated? How much control you have over those changes is what is going to basically define the compliance aspect of it. Once you have defined the compliance, you also want to make sure that there is a constant way of looking at the data, identity and access data, and to certify that what you have and what you perceive you have matches. That is, maybe every 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, depending on your organization's requirement to be compliant and the risk appetite, you might want to implement a recertification program where you say, okay, these sets of people who are high risk people need to recertify their access to their application or data every 3 months or every 6 months. So recertification is a very key component of the identity and access. Even though it seems very trivial, this is one of the most difficult ones to implement, most time consuming. As the auditors come in, this is one of the first things that they actually look at, how much control you have and how well you manage your data. And finally, the role mining is an aspect where you try to automate as the person comes in. You want to give based on the role or persona, you want to give access to certain applications or take away access to applications in an automated fashion. Now, combining all this is basically what the end user or the business sees. But then the critical aspect of this is you could lock down the entire house from the front. You could basically close the windows. But if you leave the garage open, all this is useless. So the garage aspect of it is the privileged identity and access management. So your admins, your super users have tremendous amount of access into the infrastructure, into the applications, into the data, and you need to control the entry and exit through the garage door. Otherwise, you are basically opening your entire system for a breach. So today's specific topic is on privileged access and identity management. There are a number of tools that help you in this space, and there is varying levels of complexity in implementing those tools. Now, again, we strongly believe that the tool can only do so much. There are a lot of this is around process, a lot of this is around governance, a lot of this is around the way you run your business. So and identity and access governance, any aspect of this is not just an IT headache. This has to be driven by the business. This has to be understood by the C-suite in the business. There has to be backing from the executive team. Otherwise, most of these programs either die or partially successful at best, because one, they are very time consuming, they are resource intensive. There is a lot of investment that goes in constantly into these solutions for the cat and feed of the solution. So this is not a pure IT problem. The business has to be invested in this particular solution, if not more than the IT, at least equivalent to IT. Otherwise, the solution will not be a success. So there are solutions like Beyond Trust, CyberArk. There are a number of other ways of implementing, like the Microsoft Red Forest. But again, all these solutions are going to be successful only if you also work out the business aspect of it, the process aspect of it, the procedures aspect of it. And there is some amount of pain that the end users will have to go through, because as you dial the security knob to the right, that is more pain. So the most secure system is the one that doesn't turn on, that is not connected to the network, that's always turned off. For most part, that is the most secure way of securing your environment. But then, is that useful? Probably not. So the balance has to be struck between the usefulness, the ease of use, and security. So one cannot trump the other, because you can make the system most secure system, but then users will find a way of doing things around the system if you make it unusable. So you could make a 20 character password, but then you will start seeing sticky notes on the monitors with the password. So those are the things that you have to actually understand. Each of the organization is going to be different. What you see in the colleges, in the schools, is going to be very different than what you see in the financial sector, in the construction industry. There is varied levels of understanding of information security depending on who you are dealing with. So depending on your organization, you don't choose the tool first. Define your process, define your procedures, understand your environment, and then depending on your risk appetite, depending on what you want to achieve, then go hunting for tools. The tools from our point of view should probably be the last aspect. Otherwise, you are basically going to be changing the tools every 3 years or 2 years, and you're never going to have a tool that satisfies all your needs. Now, with that said, I would want to hand it over to Amit to take it from here, and he will basically be running through the nuts and bolts of the PIM, what you can do, what we have seen in the industry, in our experience. We will take a couple of examples of what we have seen in the banking, as there are a few people from the banking industry, and then probably education sector. And Amit, all yours.
Thanks, Bala. Thanks. That was a very good overview of the things that are involved with identity management. And identity management has come into forefront considering today's world where breaches are pretty dominant. This slide actually stresses on the different aspects that identity management involves in making sure that your environment is secure, and also ensuring that it's not a roadblock for your employees. So thanks for sharing that, Bala. So now, as we see that identity management has these many tenets, now we're talking about privileged identity management and access management. Now we face similar challenges in privileged identity management and access management as well. We have to, the biggest problem is that there are certain identities that just lie around in the network and nobody even knows about them because they are hardly used, but you cannot negate the fact that they're still there. And there has to be some control, some mechanism to ensure that those identities are not compromised, and are always used within the view of the organization, and making sure that the organization is secured, and there are and is working in the most efficient and non-disruptive manner. So basically, when we say privileged identities, we are talking about these different accounts: built-in admin accounts. When it comes to Windows systems, root accounts, IPME accounts. There are accounts that are used by your services and applications for different functionalities within the application. There are accounts that you manage for your vendors. Sometimes there are test accounts that could have been provided privileges that you're not aware of. There are cloud native accounts now in these days, which could be sitting there unprotected. There are social media accounts. Now, these accounts, if they get compromised, they could lead to a huge blow to your company's reputation. So considering the amount of accounts that we have to manage, and especially considering that most of these accounts are shared in nature, so they don't have they are generic accounts. They don't have a name associated with them. They don't have any individuals assigned to them, and that's a problem that privileged identity management tries to solve. So basically, all these accounts are brought into one platform, uh, secured with industry standard encryption, and and the access is provided to individuals based on the authorization built into that platform. And not just authorization, it also tracks any usage of these accounts as well, so that at any given time, if there was, God forbid, an outage, it can be tracked as to what activities were performed if any of these accounts were in use for that activity. Moving over to the next challenge that we have in privileged identity management, as I said, that we are trying to have a centralized platform where all these privileged identities that don't have any names associated with them are managed. So the second challenge is that we have to manage these passwords as well. Why passwords? Because we actually want these passwords secured in a centralized manner, so that at one point there is not even a need to know these passwords by individuals that are actually using them, and that's actually bringing security at another level. If individuals don't know what passwords are for which accounts, and they're still able to perform their function without knowing them, that brings an added layer of security, because there's no way that these credentials could be shared outside, even by mistake. So password management, uh, as we covered in the earlier slide, that there are quite a few accounts that sit on different platforms. So the first challenge is, how do we discover these accounts? Do we install agents on all these systems? Are we able to use native protocols? So that's one of the things that we actually look into a PIM-PAM solution. Is that PIM-PAM solution supporting native protocols and can fit seamlessly within the environment to be able to perform these asset and account discovery? Once that's done, once we have an overview of all the assets that are within our organization, we try to bring in those passwords into these PIM-PAM platforms. And the reason that we do this is, again, we want to make sure that these passwords, first of all, the decentralized platform is helping us randomize those passwords, so that and also making sure that they are changed on a much frequent basis. You could change it every day per use, whatever you choose to do. So that kind of functionality is there because it is acting as a password storage at the end of the day. And because it's managing passwords, it has to ensure that it follows industry standard mechanisms to ensure that those passwords are well protected within the appliance's realm. So it offers a shared password storage. And as I said, that those passwords, that data associated with those accounts have to be strongly encrypted. And then there are standard operation procedures. So within every organization, you have standard operation procedures for performing any privileged activity, and it would have policies around what kind of length do I have for these passwords, what kind of complexity I can introduce for these passwords. And since we are talking about accounts that are sitting in their own silos, now built-in admin accounts, you cannot you can manage it with, say, Active Directory to an extent, but it's not as secure because the password is still in Active Directory. Anybody who has read access to Active Directory can actually look at those passwords. So basically, uh, that's the problem that PIM is trying to solve here. It is able to discover those passwords, keep them encrypted, and then on top of it's also able to implement workflows. So anybody wants to, say, use a privileged account for any activity, they have to go in, check in the password first. You can have workflows associated with those check-ins, like, okay, if certain systems belonging to a certain tower within the organization is being requested for access, that approval request goes to the say the team lead of that tower, and once that's approved, only then the password is allowed to be accessible by the individual. And then automated password management is which I talked about just now. You could have any sort of automated password management. You could have them rotated, on a periodic basis. You can have them rotated on every use. It's up to you. So whatever your standard operation procedure entails, you can implement that with a PIM solution. So that's about password management, which is obviously a very important aspect of privileged identity management. Now, going a step further, once you've allowed those privileged identities to be checked out to an individual who is performing a privileged activity, you cannot ignore the fact that that privileged identity has a lot of has a pretty broad access on that system. So session management actually enables you to have a view of what's going on within that session. So session management offers features like session recording, keystroke logging. So basically, if you want, you can shadow a privileged session while it's underway, or you can have session transcripts being built for every keystroke that is being pressed within that session. Even any window activity is also captured within these transcripts. You have session forensics available based on those transcripts and the session recordings. So basically, it's matured up to a level where you could actually search through keywords, wherein, say, for example, you just want to have a look at all the sessions where, say, a kill command was issued for a process. You could just you could see if there was, say, ipconfig typed in on a command prompt somewhere. So and it's matured to such an extent that you could actually type in those keywords, and once the report is available to you, you could just choose to go to the exact time on the video where that particular activity was performed. So session management, again, a very important aspect, helps secure our system, and it always keeps admin on the lookout that, hey, there could be somebody who has a visibility on what I'm doing in the session. So it brings in some responsibility for admins as well, that, okay, you have this privilege, you have to ensure that you stick to what you're supposed to do in that session.
So Amit, can we actually say that this is something that is actually used for audit and compliance?
Absolutely. So that is exactly what it is used for. As I said, that audit teams could actually just use keywords to find out all the sessions within the realm of session management manageability in the environment. It can find out where certain commands were issued, where certain windows were opened, and things like that. So this is absolutely there to help the audit team to find out uh, you know any historical background on any sessions, any privilege sessions. So another aspect of session management is actually remote manageability. So Session Manager doesn't just offer auditing as a service, it also offers a centralized platform for you to restrict such terminal sessions, SSH sessions to, uh, to originate from within that Session Manager appliance. So basically, you cannot initiate any remote sessions outside the security boundary of the session manager. And the way it works with most vendors is that session manager doesn't require uh, um, any kind of inbound connectivity to the managed endpoints. So the way it works is all the endpoints that are managed, they contact the session manager, they communicate with the session manager on 443, secured with TLS 1.2, 1.3, which is configurable. So it puts very less strain even from the perspective of firewall port requirements. So basically, that functionality itself can be leveraged for bringing in that security for any kind of remote access as well. You know that the session manager doesn't require any internal port connectivity to managed endpoints. Managed endpoints are communicating on port 443 to the session manager. You could choose to keep your session manager appliance, say in DMZ, and have it open for, say, vendor access or even admins when they're working remotely, without having them to VPN into your internal environment. You have fine-grained controls in Session Manager to ensure that certain team or certain individual belonging to a team only has access to systems that are supposed to be managed by them. It's not like VPN that once you let in people, they are actually inside your network, uh, and they can go anywhere unless your corporate network is segmented very heavily, which is not practical. So because Session Manager is able to have those rules and policies built into it, it's a fantastic tool for remote access as well. And the way it is mostly implemented is that basically once you have Session Manager adaptability, you would block access for any sort of admin activity from anywhere else, making sure that every session is being continuously monitored through Session Manager with all those features that we talked about in the previous slide. And even with Session Manager, you could have approval workflows built in, wherein before a session is initiated, an admin would have to go through an approval process, and only when the approval is granted, uh, uh, the access is granted. So Session Manager is a pretty niche and pretty helpful tool in upping your security levels. Now, privilege management is another aspect. Now, as we said in session management, Session Manager, we were provide that actually is letting people access uh, endpoints using, say, RDP or SSH sessions, wherein you're using a privileged identity, and you have access to what that privileged identity has. Now with privilege management, you can tie down that access level even further down. So basically, most of the privilege management solutions actually require some sort of an agent running on your endpoints, wherein you set up policies and rules. In Windows side of things, actually, most of these policies can be managed through group policies, which is again another advantage. So you could tie down as to what applications an individual can initiate, even if he might be using an admin account which has higher privileges. So basically, it gives you more fine-grained control over what applications can be launched, what applications can be launched elevated, what applications cannot be launched. So basically, it can let you configure a whitelist or a blacklist of applications that you want that is as per your organizational policies. And it also offers advanced control and auditing facilities as well. So that is the way most of these agents are deployed in most of the organizations. So basically, they would have these agents running in audit mode in the initial phases to monitor any privileged access, what kind of accesses are required by admins, what kind of accesses can be blocked later on. So this agent actually relies heavily on auditing, and is it is also capturing user behavior. Now it's become very important, especially considering that we are most organizations are pretty heavily invested in cloud infrastructure as well, to have user behavior analysis done, and based on user sign-ons, you are able to identify any risky behaviors based on which you can build policies to enforce certain security protocols, like, say, just giving an example of mandating MFA for any user, wherein you saw, say, a sign-on from US at one instance, and then half an hour later you see a log on from say Asia or something like that. So if obviously it's not as simple as that, because you would give time uh, uh, um, give time based on whatever audit captures you have enabled. You would give time for this analytics to give you, to stay away from false positives and give you the exact nature of user logons. And another thing is that it's platform agnostic. So basically, no matter if you're on a Windows system or a Linux system or a network device, these privilege activities are still being captured. So if there are agents available for every platform to be able to have these policies in place based on uh, application level access. So this helps improve the security posture even further. Now, so in the first phase, you actually secured your privileged identities. You made sure that users are accountable for using those privileged identities. You have associated names now with those privileged identities. You have audit trail to support that this user was using this Windows admin account at this point of time. After you've had that, you brought in more control over sessions. So you have visibility over what these users are using these privileged identities for. You are shadowing those sessions. You have your audit team running forensic analyses on these audit trails. And then you tied it further down based on your auditing and user behavior analysis uh, as to what kind of applications these users should be permitted to launch on these privileged endpoints by using privilege management solutions. Now, another aspect of these solutions is that they are highly integrable, and it is very desired to have these integrable. I was talking about having workflows associated with having checkout procedures implemented for privileged identities, having uh, approval workflows for initiating sessions, having integration with help desk and ticketing systems actually helps streamline those workflows in a very efficient manner. So you could choose to have integration with, say, ISM, that okay, if you require any sort of access, you would need to submit a ticket, and then once that ticket is in a certain state, And you could have those workflows rather than building it on Session Manager, which is you could have it built on, say, ServiceNow, because those are solutions built for such kind of workflows. So you could have those workflows implemented in ServiceNow and have those workflows integrated with access to PIM or PAM. You have integration with SIEM for audit and analytics and forensics and stuff like that. You have integration with different SSO and MFA platforms to ensure that whoever is gaining access to these systems go through a multi-factor authentication protocol. And then you have access certification. So basically this is integration with, say, a governance module wherein you are certifying that, okay, these privileged identities are supposed to be owned by these teams, these individuals, and whether those identities are still required or not. And you have these certification workflows for different individuals to ensure that you're having a control on privileged identities exploding into your environment as well. So you're keeping a control on the count as well. So that's what I talked about. Having integration with governance would actually help you tie these ownerships much tighter with individuals, having them accountable for different privileged identities. And analysis and reporting, again, comes with integration with SIEM solutions for your audit team to do their forensics analysis and have certain sort of KPIs built around these privileged identities. Now, this is a quick overview of how it would look like if you have a PIM-PAM solution in place. So basically, as we can see, that there is a user sitting, waiting on an approval to come through, so that he could get access to certain privileged identities, which are stored securely in this vault. And then once the access is granted to the privileged identity, he's able to uh, use the identities and connect to any managed endpoints that he wants. At the same time, our session manager pieces are playing in the background, having those session recordings, transcripts, and analyses done in the background. And this is the remote worker scenario. So in this particular situation, we see that you could either choose to have your session manager appliance within your intranet or on cloud. Most of the vendors actually offer session manager as a cloud appliance as well, that you could have separately for your external admins. And the way it works is that you would, as you can see, that all the connections to session manager are into it. The session manager itself doesn't require any sort of inbound connectivity to any managed endpoint. So managed endpoints actually talk outbound to the session manager on port 443.
So Amit, is this a segue to discuss a little bit about in today's time where most of the end users are working from home, where now the perimeter is not your firewall within your data center or your office, but now it's basically everybody's home. How does the session manager, can we discuss a little bit about how does the solution help people securing their environment in terms of like a native VPN versus application-centric access mechanism?
Exactly. So we did touch base on that earlier on as well. So basically, as we can see that having a session manager appliance in place, first of all, there are no firewall port constraints required, additional firewall port constraints required. It works on 443. It works natively as well. There are no agents running as such. It's not required anyways. Some vendors actually do require some agents for certain to offer certain additional functionalities. So in terms of footprint, it's pretty minimal. The only connection that the only thing that you're exposing for Session Manager for folks outside is port 443 again. So all these connections are coming on 443, which is never a challenge for firewalls, because mostly 443 is open by default. And compare this with VPN, and you are controlling what endpoints an individual coming from outside or even inside has access to. You could have certain logical constructs within Session Manager, having different sets of managed endpoints, and having fine-grained control over what endpoints can be visible to what admins. Admins can be again grouped in teams. Uh, so uh, uh, so basically, when comparing it with VPN, actually there is no comparison. With VPN, you're allowing individuals to come inside your network, having complete access to the network. You don't have control on where your admins can go until, as I said, that you have impractical firewall rules in place. You have a very highly segmented network. So basically, and that takes a lot of effort. You don't have to worry about putting in any of that effort and still be sure that your environment is secured by just setting up an outbound 443 connection to the session manager for external access. And there is no difference between what could be implemented for an internal admin or external admin on the session manager. You have the same set of controls for any access from anywhere.
So, and Amit, I just want to add here. So this solution, the PIM-PAM solution, even though it is related to the privileged identity and access for the admins, this can be extended even for the regular users, where you can
Absolutely.
actually protect applications behind the session manager.
Absolutely. So it's not just the entire operating system that you're exposing with Session Manager. You can expose your web applications. You can expose any sort of network protocol through the Session Manager.
Okay,
so it is flexible that way.
So I know that we are coming up on the hour. So at this point in time, let's open it up for the questions, for people to ask questions and any comments and feedback. So let's put up the question slide, and then let's answer any questions that people have. So Steve, if you have muted the lines, you can unmute the lines for everybody, please.
Okay.
All right, so I'll move over to the question slide just so that everyone knows.
Sure.
There are a few more things about the maturity model as to what kind of levels are there, and when you choose to go with the privileged access management, what kind of level you might be in right now, and what kind of level you could achieve if you choose to invest in privileged access management. And this slide would be shared, so and any questions that you might have later on can be shared to the contacts that are visible here.
Amit, we can see some questions on the chat, which has come from Nikhil and Subodh. So we can just address that.
Let me open up chat. Okay. So Nikhil, if we have, so Nikhil's question is,
okay, so the question is, how do we actually implement, and Nikhil, correct me if I'm wrong here in understanding your question. You're basically asking if the identity and access management has to be extended to all the customers who are coming in, and basically we have to control access to the customer landscape on what access they have within the application or not, and do they have any privileged access within that particular application? What are the attributes, and how do we actually go about building a solution? Is that correct? Okay. So I'm going to go a little bit off grid here to answer your question. The customer I would actually bucket customer, external users, vendors, suppliers, distributors, all those things into a separate bucket. So if we actually consider identities, there are two types of buckets. One is your internal identity, one is your external identity. And at a very broad level, at a broad stroke, we can basically say customers fall into the external identity aspect. Now, definitely the external identities have very little visibility into your internal infrastructure at an application by application basis compared to your internal people who come in through, say, a VPN or have an internal account in your local authentication and authorization directory. The most important aspect that we look at when we are doing authorizations and authentications and privilege management for these external identities is one, you want to maintain the confidentiality of your organization in terms of data and applications, that you don't expose even the directory of what you have within your infrastructure available for consumption to these external identities. So by identity type, you define the risk and you define what can be exposed and what cannot be exposed to these types of users / identities that are coming from the outside. The second aspect is if the customers are coming from outside into your environment, and this I'm talking about behind your data center firewalls, as Amit just mentioned, you don't want to open up the entire web server or application to these users or provide them some kind of deep connectivity in terms of the network. You want to expose only the application, and if possible, the web pages or the application itself is broken up into components that are only having functionality where the external users have to interact and share data. The third aspect of it is basically registering, deregistering these users as they come in and go out of your organization. One, because there are other laws, local laws that basically a lot of countries, with the European Union or US or even Middle East, you want to make sure that the privacy laws are handled properly. You don't want to maintain the data of a user if you really don't have to for regulatory reasons. And if the user chooses to remove their data, you need to be in a place where you identify and clean the data to be compliant with something like GDPR. So this is a much deeper discussion, and we can probably have a separate chat on the email. But from a CIAM point of view, the critical aspect is defining the risk, exposing what data you really want to share with your customers or external users, segregate that particular data. Sometimes it is, we have actually seen where a separate copy of that particular data is maintained, but it kind of gets messy because you now have to maintain duplicate data in two different places. But generally, those are the aspects that we actually look at. On the second question, I actually see a question from Subodh on GCC banking sector and reports. There is a plethora of reports available in any of the tools that you actually pick up. There are reports around who did what, when, where, and how type of reports. So all those aspects are available out of the box. There are native integrations for some SIEM systems. There are some customizable integrations for certain SIEM systems where you can actually translate an event happening coming through these PIM-PAM solutions into an alert or an event into the SIEM, which basically can be added as a report out to the customer. So from a reporting point of view, you can actually do reports for who came in, what time, what actions were performed, how they were performed, and what was the impact and how many systems got impacted. So all those aspects of it are readily available out of the box in most of the PIM-PAM solutions.
Right. So the next question is from G. Ravinder Reddy. He's asking how Session Manager works for cloud applications like Azure App and Function Apps and stuff like that. So Ravinder, are you talking specifically about having access to the Azure App Engine or applications built on top of Azure App? Because mostly these would be web applications which can be exposed through Session Manager. So if you're talking about having access to the to say Azure Portal or the AWS console, that can be controlled with Session Manager as well. Does that answer your question, Ravinder?
Yes, Amit. Thank you. I'm asking for Azure application services which we are deployed in not the containers, directly the app services and functional apps. And apart from that, is in coming to the AWS, it is a AWS Code Star, which has been provided the .NET based applications and Java based applications and other Node.js and etc. Is that works for the Session Manager?
Just one question, Ravinder. So you're talking about having access to the actual PaaS service,
Right?
or
PaaS services.
You're talking, okay, and how do you, so what kind of access are you talking about? Are you talking about console level access or access through the?
No, for application level access. Let me explain you more in depth on that question. I have created one application services called .domain.com. Okay, for that I need to give the access to external user for some of the verifications or third-party user. I can say integrations like payment gateway integrations, blah blah. Okay.
Right.
For that, the Session Manager will control this access to only the particular applications and to the some of the access like a read-only access or read-write access, such a kind of scenarios I'm asking for.
Absolutely. So with Session Manager, you can control the access. Yes. About the second part of your question was, can you control whether you have read-only access? So is that something
Right.
that's exposed through your application itself?
Yeah.
So some people could have read-only access, but so that's role-based access control on the application itself, right?
Okay.
So are you saying that does it offer some sort of an API which lets you integrate your RBAC, RBAC logic into Session Manager? Is that the question is?
No. When we are exposing, we are giving the access to the external user like a third-party vendors to integrate something into our local applications. For that, we can control their access from the Session Manager.
Yes.
No, Ravindra, that's a little bit more of a, I think that functionality would be something like more of an API gateway control type of stuff, an SOA or Kong or some of those, because there you are basically controlling the API on what you can do, session tokens and stuff like that. That's not the function of the PIM or the PAM.
Okay. Just we can control the access of those applications and in inbuilt users, I can say, not for third-party applications or third-party users.
Yeah. So what you can do is, if you want, these applications do provide API level integration, so you can integrate some of the code into your application for access controls and stuff like that. But not this is not the solution for doing RBAC control or data access at that application level.
Okay. Thanks, Bala. Thanks, Amit.
Yep. Thanks, Ravinder. So the next question is. The solution here is great. Does it help? Does it help us reactively respond to a threat to make infra restrictive? And that's where 1 + 60. Okay, so yeah, so basically that's where the forensics analyses and the audit trails help, and you could have them integrated with your SIEM solution for having those behavioral and analytics as well built on top, for reactive responses to these threats. So that's something over the time which gets built and relies on your SIEM solution as well.
Now, one other thing that we can actually add here to answer a little bit more deeper is I have actually seen the PIM-PAM solution being integrated with SIEM with certain bots created where when a particular event is triggered based on an ID, you can actually execute certain scripts or certain procedures which could basically perform an action. So things like if an account is getting locked out, say 5 times within the last 5 minutes, it can raise an event and send out a notification email to say your central SOC saying that, hey, this account is getting repeatedly locked out, please take a look at it. Or it could be a service account, it could be an admin account or whatever that might be. There are things where if say a Wi-Fi access point is having an issue, you can basically write a script to reboot that particular Wi-Fi point. So some of those integrations are reactive, but most of the PIM-PAM solution, if you're talking about reactive stuff, that's pretty much going to be, as Amit mentioned, going to be in the forensic space or either or audit and compliance reporting space.
So my specific question was exactly that it does not come out as a service from intrinsic within the tool. We have to have a SIM to support the tool, do that, or does it come out in within the tool itself?
If you're running a SOC, you would want to run it with the SOC so that they actually have the visibility with the SIEM. The tool itself also provides, depending on the tool itself provides, like Beyond Trust, we have actually written those scripts inside that particular tool also. But if you are looking at making intelligent decisions across multiple things and correlating the data, that integration will come only with SIEM, because SIEM has visibility into a lot more sources of data that is coming in compared to just basically a session manager, which is just specifically around a user or some attack vector coming into your session manager solution. Did that answer your question?
Yes, Bala. Thank you so much. Thank you, Amit.
Thanks. Can we integrate threat intelligence things with PIM?
Threat intelligence feeds are generally integrated with SIEM. If you're talking about like an X-Force or something like that, those are all SIEM specific feeds. We generally don't integrate those with the PIM solution. The only thing is the PIM goes into SIEM, and then the threat intelligence comes into the SIEM, and then the two gets correlated together. That's generally is the norm. Now, can you do it? Anything is possible, but that is not the. I would not consider that's the right architecture for integration.
Yeah, and PIM basically is there as a control rather than being a reactive, response to any threats. So basically, it can get fed into SIEM, basically mostly for user behavioral analysis, but not to threat intelligence to that extent.
Yeah. And so both pricing structure, honestly, most of the solutions, and I don't want to get quoted on this one, depending on the vendor, the pricing structures are different, but most of them will go with an endpoint that needs to be protected, the number of endpoints that needs to be protected, or the identities that needs to be protected. That's pretty much is the general rule of thumb. Most of the cases, these are endpoints to be protected.
Device-based.
Device-based, yeah.
Mostly.
Okay, there are no more questions. Thank you everyone for your time. I know that we went a little over. Okay, that's just one question. What capabilities the solution has for reporting clients persons who cannot get? Tatiana, so the question that you ask is what type of reporting?
Huh? What'd you say?
I don't know if we should buy some hair for now.
You shouldn't buy hair for now?
So, okay.
Some hair, just like, let's say like 20 or 20.
Steve, can you please go on mute? So Tatiana, your question is what capabilities in terms of reporting we have on the solution. As I mentioned, there are out of the box, there are reports which allow you to look at who did what, when, and where. So basically you can identify which identity came in from which particular location, did what in your system and at what time. So you can basically create an entire end-to-end history of events that basically happen with a particular action. So those reports are available directly with session recording. And then similarly, every single audit entry is captured and reported out. SOD violations. No, Tatiana, the SOD violations are not something that the PIM or the PAM solution is going to help, because the PIM and PAM solution is not something that is inside the applications controlling access to the data. It's more so on the whether you can have access to the application or not level. So it's not getting into the RBAC model for controlling. So I would actually say the SOD violations the only SOD violations you can actually do is if you create a group where you define access to an application, and then the PIM and PAM can basically control access to that set of applications based on the group membership. That's the extent that we can go with this. Did that answer your question?
But it does offer integration with identity governance modules, so that could be leveraged for any SOD violations, but it's not out of box.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not just recording. It's about what kind of changes you have to make in your environment to bring this on, what kind of controls you have on any admins that connect to privileged resources in your network. How is it extendable to even remote workforces? How does it integrate with different SIEM solutions to have a better view of what is going on with your privileged resources with the use of these privileged identities? So it is a very integral component of. So it's not there to replace SIEM. It is to enhance SIEM for an organization to have a view of all privileged activities within the environment.
Yeah, and this is just not recording. It's actually even blocking, protecting your environment. So the primary function of the PIM PAM solution is to protect the environment, be proactive, give access or deny access to the application. Then whatever access has been granted inside the application, it basically tracks those, records those, and then it can send it to SIEM, to a centralized SOC, or it can basically maintain it locally within the solution.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining ISSQUARED's web series. And for more videos, training, and informative information, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website at issquared.com or sale@issquared.com.